The most important food in human history was discovered by mistake inside the stomach of a dead animal, by someone who was just trying not to starve. But the story does not start with a factory, or a farm, or a recipe. It starts somewhere much older and much stranger than any of those things. It starts with a journey, a problem, and an accident that nobody planned and nobody could have seen coming. Somewhere in the ancient Middle East, roughly 8 to 10,000 years ago, a traveler was crossing a long distance on foot. He was carrying milk in a pouch made from the dried stomach of a slaughtered animal. This was completely normal back then. Animal stomachs were tough, flexible, and did not leak practical containers in a world that had no plastic, no glass, and no metal containers small enough to carry on a journey. What the traveler did not know was that the lining of that stomach held something remarkable. Rennet, a group of natural enzymes found inside the stomachs of young animals that helps them digest their mother's milk. When milk sits inside a stomach lining, those enzymes start working. The proteins begin to separate. The liquid turns solid. And what comes out looks nothing like what went in, tastes nothing like what went in, and lasts far, far longer than what went in. The traveler opened the pouch and found curds that this was not an invention. Nobody sat down and planned this. No civilization built it in a lab or designed it in a kitchen. It happened because a hungry person put milk in the only container they had, walked through the heat of the day, and opened it hours later to find something completely changed. And here is what makes that moment one of the most important in all of human history. It solved a problem that had been hurting early human communities since farming first began. Fresh milk goes bad within hours in a warm climate. For early farming families that depended on their animals, this was a constant and painful waste. Nutrition that was hard to produce and impossible to store, but firm, pressed curds, solid, slightly sour, and dense, could last for days, weeks, or even months in some forms. Cheese was not a luxury food. It was a survival technology. It was the first real solution humans found to the problem of storing one of their most important food sources. Scientists have found traces of cheese residue in clay pots from Poland dating back around 5,500 years. Ancient Egyptian tomb art shows what appear to be cheese-making tools as early as 3000 BC. The evidence reaches across the ancient world, the Middle East, the Mediterranean, the British Isles. Wherever people kept animals, they eventually found ways to preserve what those animals gave them. Cheese is older than the wheel, older than writing, older than almost every building or monument any civilization has ever left behind. And it all started with nothing more than hunger, luck, and a dead animal's stomach. But this accidental discovery would only become truly powerful once it reached the hands of two civilizations that knew exactly how to use it. Ancient Egypt took cheese seriously enough to bury it with the dead. Scientists digging through tombs from the Old Kingdom period have found signs of dairy products placed beside the deceased food for the journey into the afterlife. In the tomb of one of Egypt's earliest pharaohs, remnants believed to be a form of fresh cheese were found sealed inside clay jars, surviving more than 4,000 years underground. For the Egyptians, cheese was not simple peasant food. It was valuable enough to accompany royalty into eternity, but it was Rome that took cheese from a cultural symbol and turned it into something far more practical. The Roman legions were the most powerful military force the ancient world had ever seen. At their peak, they controlled land stretching from Scotland to the edge of the Persian Gulf, and they kept that control through organization and supply as much as through fighting. A Roman soldier marching through Gaul or Germania needed to carry enough food to keep going for days or weeks at a time, without supplied trucks, without refrigeration, without being able to reliably find food in enemy territory. Cheese was almost a perfect field ration. It packed a lot of calories into a small space. It was compact and easy to carry. It did not spoil quickly. It was high in fat and protein. Roman military records suggest that soldiers received regular portions of it alongside grain and salted meat. The job of feeding a conquering army was in large part the job of managing cheese. But Rome's relationship with cheese went well beyond the military. The Roman writers Columella and Pliny the Elder both wrote about cheese making in real detail, the different varieties they knew, the techniques needed to make them, the differences between cheeses from different parts of the empire. Pliny wrote about cheeses from different regions, the way a food critic might write about restaurants today, comparing the qualities varieties of cheese from the Apennine Mountains, from Gaul, from the hills of what is now Switzerland. Roman builders constructed special rooms for making and aging cheese spaces called caseae, where temperature, airflow, and moisture could be managed to guide the fermentation process. These were not casual farmhouse operations. They were organized, repeatable, and built to scale. Rome was not just eating cheese. Rome was systematizing it centuries before anyone had words for what that meant. And as the legions moved, the knowledge moved with them. Roman conquest brought dairy farming and cheese-making skills to parts of northern Europe, where people had kept cattle, but had not yet developed the deeper craft of fermentation and aging. The cheese cultures of France, Britain, and Central Europe did not grow up on their own. They grew in large part from the civilization that marched through them. Then Rome fell. And when it did, almost everything it had built its roads, its systems, its stored knowledge began to break apart. Almost everything. The cheese did not disappear. It moved behind monastery walls, and what the monks did with it would change European civilization for 1,000 years. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, Europe entered a long period of serious disruption. Trade routes broke down, cities shrank, knowledge that had been kept in libraries and institutions scattered or was simply lost. But inside the walls of Christian monasteries, something very different was happening. The monasteries of medieval Europe had something almost no other place in that broken world could offer: stability. They had land, given and protected by the church. They had workers' monks following fixed daily schedules under shared rules. They had literacy at a time when most people could not read. And they had something rarer than almost anything else in the early medieval period. They had time. The Benedictine and Cistercian orders became keepers of farming knowledge that might otherwise have been lost completely. And within that knowledge, cheese-making held a special place. Monks needed food that could get them through the fasting periods. Their religious rules required food that was filling, long-lasting, and could be made on their own land without depending on outside markets. Cheese covered all of that, but the monks did not simply hold on to the old Roman techniques. They improved them. They tested new ideas. They found that pressing curds more firmly and aging them longer produced completely different results. That washing the outer rind with salt water or with local wine or beer changed the flavor in ways that could be controlled and repeated. That aging cheese in natural limestone caves, where the temperature and moisture stayed constant through every season, allowed changes that no ordinary kitchen could create. The cheeses they developed became some of the most celebrated in the world. Roquefort, according to an old story, was discovered by a shepherd who left his lunch bread and fresh curds in a cave near the village of Roquefort-sur-Soulzon in southern France. When he came back weeks later, he found the curds completely changed by the cave's natural mold's deep blue-green veins running through something pungent and sharp and extraordinary. Whether that story is entirely true is uncertain. What is documented is that Roquefort was being produced in that region well before the year 1000, and in 1411, King Charles VI of France gave the village of Roquefort a royal charter, one of the earliest forms of legal protection ever given to a food. Gruyere, Munster, Port Salut, the roots of these cheeses run directly through monastery cellars and monastic craftsmanship. And beyond the craft, there was the money. Monasteries used cheese as a form of currency. Local communities paid what they owed the church in wheels of aged dairy. Monks traded cheese through networks that crossed regional borders, building economic connections that worked, in many ways, like early banking systems. The income from cheese production helped fund the building of cathedrals. It supported political alliances. It gave the church a source of financial power that worked completely outside the feudal system around it. For centuries, if you wanted the finest cheese in Europe, you went to a monastery. But the monastery monopoly was about to be broken, not by war, not by plague, but by something far more ordinary and far more transformative. By the 14th century, cheese had grown beyond the monastery. The great trading cities of medieval Europe, Venice, Genoa, Bruges, Amsterdam, were building commercial networks of impressive reach. And among the goods moving through those networks, cheese had become something no serious merchant could ignore. The Dutch understood something about cheese that nobody had quite said out loud before. To travel far, it needed to be built for travel. Fresh cheese was perishable. Soft cheeses lasted days, not weeks. But the Dutch cheesemakers of Edam and Gouda developed something different: wheels pressed firm. aged until dry, and sealed under a coat of wax that kept out air, moisture, and contamination. A wheel of Edam, properly sealed and stored, could survive months on a ship crossing the Atlantic. It could handle tropical heat. It could arrive in West Africa or the Caribbean or South America in perfectly edible condition. Edam became one of the most widely traded food products in the known world during the 15th and 16th centuries. Dutch merchant ships carried it to every coast their vessels could reach. This is where the story takes its darkest turn. Among the ships those wheels of cheese traveled on were slave vessels. The Dutch, British, and Portuguese slave trade needed food supplies for human cargo. The enslaved Africans packed into the holds of ships crossing the Atlantic. Cheese, precisely because it was calorie-dense, long-lasting, and cheap, appeared in the supply records of slave ships alongside dried fish, grain, and salted meat. The same engineering that made Edam suitable for royal tables in Amsterdam made it useful for keeping alive people those same merchants considered property. The food that had been honored by Egyptian pharaohs, used by Roman emperors, and refined by Christian monks was now being loaded onto the most brutal ships in human history. Meanwhile, in Italy, a different kind of protection was forming. Parmigiano Reggiano, the great-aged cheese of the Po Valley, was already appearing in trade records as early as the 13th and 14th centuries. By the 1400s, it was being shipped through the ports of Genoa and Venice to buyers across the Mediterranean. Its production methods were becoming standardized. Specific regions, specific cattle, specific seasons, specific techniques. An early understanding was forming that this cheese could only truly come from one place, and that any attempt to copy it elsewhere would produce something lesser. English cheddar, too, was building a commercial identity. Made in the caves and farmhouses of Somerset, it was sold in London markets, exported to Europe, and beginning to develop the reputation that would eventually make it the most widely produced cheese style in the world. Cheese had stopped being a local food. It had become a global commodity with geopolitical weight, but the darkest chapter of its history was not on the open ocean. It was about to happen in the factories of the Industrial Revolution in 1851. A farmer named Jesse Williams opened a cheese factory in Rome, New York. Not the Rome of emperors and legions. The Rome of upstate New York, a small American town in the middle of dairy country. Williams had a straightforward idea. Instead of making cheese the way every farm family had for generations, slowly, individually, with knowledge passed from parent to child, he would bring production together in one place. He would collect milk from nearby farms, process it in one building, and make cheese at a size and consistency no single farmhouse could match. Within 20 years, the American factory model had changed cheese production across the entire continent. A factory could produce in a single week what a farmhouse took a full season to make. Costs dropped. Prices dropped. Cheese became available to people who had rarely or never eaten it before. By most measures of food access and basic nutrition, this was a real achievement. But something else happened alongside that achievement, something quieter, and in its own way, more damaging. The knowledge disappeared. The craft of cheese, making understanding cultures, understanding aging, understanding the relationship between a specific field's grass and the taste of the milk it produced had been built up over centuries by farmers, monks, and regional producers who passed it on through direct experience. It lived in hands and noses and memory. It could not be written into a factory instruction manual. When the factory replaced the farmhouse, that knowledge became economically worthless. And economic worthlessness, in the modern world, is the fastest road to extinction. Pasteurization made the shift even bigger. Introduced to cheese production in the late 19th century, pasteurization was a genuine public health advance. It killed harmful bacteria that could make fresh cheese dangerous to eat. But it also killed much of the microbial richness that gave traditional cheeses their distinct character. The living ecosystem of a raw milk cheese, the wild yeasts and bacteria that a specific region's environment contributed to the flavor, was replaced with a controlled, predictable process that produced the same result every single time. Safe, consistent, but flat. In Europe, traditional producers began to push back. They argued that a cheese made by industrial methods in a factory had no real connection to the cheese that had been made in their region for centuries. They asked for legal protections. They were mostly ignored. For now, because the most aggressive move in cheese history was not the factory. It was what one American businessman did next, with a single patent that would make industrial cheese not just common, but invisible. In 1916, a Chicago businessman named James Kraft filed a patent. On the surface, it was not a remarkable document. It described a process for melting natural cheese, mixing it with emulsifying salts, and reshaping it into a uniform, shelf-stable product that could be packaged, stored without refrigeration for long periods, and sold at the same quality no matter where or when it was bought. What Kraft had patented was not really cheese. It was a cheese product, a manufactured version of something that had been made by hand for 10,000 years. He sold it to the United States Army. The military was preparing to enter the First World War, and it needed to feed soldiers in conditions where real cheese would spoil and regular food supply lines were unreliable. Kraft's processed products solved that problem cleanly. The Army bought millions of pounds of it. The contract made Kraft very wealthy. And it did something else. It introduced an entire generation of young American men to a flavor, a texture, and a convenience they had never experienced in their kitchens back home. When those soldiers came home from Europe, they brought the taste with them. Kraft moved fast. By 1928, Velveeta had launched a smooth, block-shaped processed cheese product marketed not as convenience food, but as a health food. Advertisements said it was easier to digest, purer in quality, better for children. The marketing was deliberate and very effective. The legal fights that followed were remarkable. The EFTA and food standards agencies struggled for decades with a basic question: what, legally, is cheese? Kraft and its competitors pushed hard against any labeling requirement that would separate their products from natural cheese. They lobbied, fought legal battles, and marketed with equal energy. The result was a confusing system of labels: cheese food, cheese product, pasteurized processed cheese that most consumers could not meaningfully understand. Post-war American suburban culture welcomed processed cheese as a sign of modern convenience and abundance. Individually wrapped singles, cheese from a can, the cheese sauce on fast food nachos. Each of these was, in legal terms, something other than cheese. In cultural terms, for tens of millions of Americans, it was the only cheese they had ever really known. And through American military bases, foreign aid programs, and the global spread of fast food chains from the 1960s onward, this version of cheese was exported to the rest of the world. While America was eating Velveeta, Europe was fighting a war of its own, not with weapons, but with wheels of Parmesan and very expensive lawyers. By the late 20th century, European cheese producers had been watching their traditional cheeses copied, undercut, and misrepresented for decades. American Parmesan, Danish feta, Australian Gruyere. Products that borrowed the names of cheeses developed over centuries in specific regions of Italy, Greece, and Switzerland, made by completely different methods, with completely different milk, in completely different places. To the European producers, this was not imitation. It was theft, not of a recipe, but of an identity. The European Union's protected designation of origin system, the PDO, was the legal answer. Under this system, certain food products were given geographic protection. Only cheese produced in a specific region, using specific methods, could carry the traditional name. Only Parmigiano Reggiano, made in the provinces of Parma, Reggio Emilia, Modena, and parts of Bologna and Mantua, could be called Parmigiano Reggiano. Only blue cheese aged in the caves of Roquefort sur Soulzon could be called Roquefort. The battles that followed were intense. Greece had been producing feta for centuries, a soft, brined white cheese made from sheep's milk, or a mix of sheep and goat's milk, connected to specific regional practices and a specific landscape. Denmark and Germany had been producing and selling their own versions of feta made from cow's milk in industrial facilities at far lower cost for decades. When Greece applied for PDO protection, Denmark challenged it all the way to the European Court of Justice. Greece won. In 2005, the court confirmed that feta was a Greek product. Danish feta would have to be renamed. The Parmigiano Reggiano Consortium went after imitation products across 3 continents, targeting producers in Argentina, Australia, and the United States, selling hard cheese powder in green canisters with Italian-sounding names and zero connection to Parma or Reggio Emilia. The United States refused to recognize European PDO rules. Under American food law, Parmesan and feta had become generic terms, just descriptions of a style of cheese, not markers of a specific geographic product. The trade disputes that followed were never fully settled. Legally speaking, many of them are still going on. What these battles showed was something deeper than trade law. They raised a question that the entire history of cheese had been quietly building toward. Can a place own a food? Can a name carry a history? Can the knowledge built up over centuries by a specific community in a specific landscape be protected against the flattening force of global commerce? The cheese wars had no clean ending. And the bigger threat, the one no courtroom in Brussels or Geneva could stop, was only just starting to take shape. There is a laboratory in California where no cows are involved in making cheese. The scientists working there are using a process called precision fermentation, where microorganisms are given the genetic instructions needed to produce casein, the key protein that gives dairy cheese its structure, its stretch, and its melt. The microbes are fed, they produce the protein, and the protein is collected and combined with fats and cultures to create something that is, at the molecular level, functionally identical to dairy cheese. No animal was milked, no land was cleared for grazing, no methane came from a cow. Companies like New Culture and organizations like Remilk are at the front of what many in the food technology world are calling the next protein revolution. Their argument is simple. The global dairy industry is one of the most environmentally expensive food systems on Earth. Dairy cattle contribute significantly to global methane emissions. Cheese production, specifically, requires large quantities of milk. It takes roughly 10 liters of milk to produce just 1 kilogram of cheese, making it one of the more resource-heavy foods in the modern diet. Environmental researchers have been tracking these costs for years. The land needed for dairy farming, the water used, the emissions released, the numbers are significant, and they keep growing as global cheese consumption continues to rise. The precision fermentation industry says it can give the world the cheese it wants without the environmental cost of making it the traditional way. Traditional cheesemakers have a different answer. What fermentation technology produces, they argue, is not cheese. It is a copy of cheese's chemical structure, a perfect replica of the molecule, without the meaning that surrounds that molecule. A wheel of Comte aged for 24 months in a cave in the Jura Mountains carries within it the specific grasses of that pasture, the specific bacteria of that cave, the specific hands of the person who turned it every week through the changing seasons. None of that is casein. None of that can be reproduced in a laboratory. No matter how precisely the protein is engineered, they are not wrong. And neither are the scientists. This is exactly where cheese sits today, between a past of deep complexity and craft and a future of extraordinary precision and efficiency. A second accident may already be in motion, a reinvention as complete and as unplanned as the first. 10,000 years ago, when a traveler opened a stomach pouch and found something no one had designed. But before we decide what cheese becomes next, it is worth going back to where it started and asking what it actually meant. 10,000 years ago, someone made a mistake. They carried milk in the wrong container, walked too far in the heat, and opened their food to find something completely transformed. They could have thrown it away. They were hungry enough not to that choice, if it was even a real choice, set everything in motion that followed. The Egyptian pharaoh buried with curds in a clay jar. The Roman soldier marching through Gaul with pressed cheese in his pack. The Benedictine monk turning a wheel in a limestone cave, following a process he only partly understood, producing something he knew from experience would be extraordinary in 6 months. The Dutch craftsman pressing a wax seal over a wheel of Gouda so it could survive a sea crossing. The shepherd returning to a cave to find his lunch turned by mold into something remarkable. James Kraft with his patent and his army contract, redefining for millions of people what cheese was allowed to be. Every one of these moments belongs to the same story. And the story is not really about dairy. It is about what humans do with accidents. It is about the lengths people will go to in order to preserve nutrition, build trade, protect identity, hold on to power, and resist the loss of something they love. There is, right now, a quiet revival happening in the margins of the industrial food system. Small producers making raw milk cheese in caves and cellars and converted barns, using cultures that have been kept alive for generations, following methods that cannot be automated or standardized without becoming something else entirely. They are selling to people willing to pay for the difference people who can taste in a properly aged wheel, something that no factory has yet found a way to copy. That revival matters. Not because craft cheese will ever outcompete industrial cheese at large scale, it will not, but because it represents a refusal to let the knowledge vanish completely. A decision that some things are worth keeping even when keeping them is inefficient. Cheese has survived every force that has ever tried to control it, simplify it, ban it, or replace it. It survived the fall of Rome. It survived the Reformation, which shut down the monasteries that had protected it for centuries. It survived industrialization, patent law, processed food culture, and the legal battles of the global trade system. It now faces the most fundamental challenge it has ever seen: a redefinition, not just of how it is made, but of what it actually is. And how we answer that challenge will say something important about us, about what we believe food is for, about whether the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years' knowledge that came not from planning but from accident, and was refined not in laboratories but in caves and farmhouses and monastery cellars, deserves to survive this century. 10,000 years ago, someone made a mistake, and it kept us alive. The only question now is whether we are wise enough to remember that before we engineer the mistake away entirely. If this story changed how you look at something you eat every day, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind ordinary things. And tell us in the comments, which part of this surprised you most: the Roman military cheese rations, the monastery monopoly, or the fact that what many of us grew up calling cheese might not legally qualify as cheese at all?